Turning now to today's primary elections. The contest happening in 5 states will test just how much influence former President Trump still has over the Republican Party. He has endorsed several candidates in Georgia as he looks for payback against people who refused to fake the 2020 election results or refuse his argument that there was fraud during the 2020 election. Ed O'Keefe is there covering many of the major races.
Good morning from this polling site in Atlanta. Georgia is just the latest chapter in the ongoing divisions in the Republican Party, and this one is especially notable because never before in modern history, at least, have we had a former president and a former vice president at odds over political contests. Georgia Governor Brian Kemp shared the stage last night with longtime ally, former Vice President Mike Pence.
We're in the fight for the soul of our state.
That puts them at odds with former President Donald Trump, who pushed former Senator David Perdue to enter the governor's race.
Brian Kemp is a turncoat, he's a coward, and he's a complete and total disaster.
Re-elect Governor Brian Kemp for 4 more years at the State House.
But Perdue is turning his focus to the unopposed Democratic candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams, and these comments she made last weekend.
I am tired of hearing about being the best state in the country to do business when we are the worst state in the country to live. When you're number 48 for mental health, when you're number 1 for maternal mortality, then you're not the number 1 place to live.
And while the 48-year-old has called Georgia home since high school, Perdue had this response last night.
Said that Georgia's the worst place in the country to live. Hey, she ain't from here. Let her go back where she came from. She doesn't like it here.
Trump has endorsed dozens of Republican candidates across the country this year, but he's arguably most personally invested in Georgia. His hand-picked candidate for U.S. Senate, ex-NFL player Herschel Walker, is expected to easily win his primary, setting himself up for a race against Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock. But it's in Georgia's other statewide races where the former president's support may not be enough to produce a win. In the wake of the 2020 elections, he pressured Kemp and Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to help change the results of the election so he could keep the White House. Trump's pressure included phone calls like this one.
Look, Brad, I have to find 12,000 votes.
Both men refused, and that's upset some Republican voters here.
I will not vote for Brian Kemp under any circumstances.
But polls show Kemp is likely to easily win tonight, thanks to Republicans who support how he handled the pandemic, has built up the state economy, and his willingness to stand up to Trump.
Is Trump the kingmaker of the party? I firmly believe he is not.
I think it's rather unseemly for a former president. And I believe it's somewhat vengeful.
Raffensperger faces a crowded field and may be headed to a runoff.
I've talked to Tea Party groups, Republican Party groups, Rotary, Kiwanis, business chambers, any group that'll invite me in. I've been talking about the facts.
So we're here in Georgia, but there are other notable races happening across the country today involving some familiar names and faces. Let's start in Arkansas, where former White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders, backed by former President Trump, is going to easily win a Republican primary, likely setting her up to easily win the governor's mansion in November, taking a job that her father, Mike Huckabee, once held. And then down in Texas, George P. Bush, the nephew and grandson of the former President Bush, is in a nasty runoff with the Attorney General Ken Paxton. George P. Bush, the only Bush currently in elected office, and if he loses, it could spell the end of the Bush political dynasty. Henry and Mola.
Ed O'Keefe on the ground in Georgia. Thanks, Ed. Let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Bo Erickson, who's been following these Georgia races for us. Bo, good morning. As you know, Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger is trying to fight off a challenge from Republican Congressman Jody Hice, who's backed by former President Donald Trump. Hice has made some false statements about election fraud in the past. So where exactly does that race stand right now? And sort of break down what's at stake here for us.
Exactly. In many years, the race for Georgia's Secretary of State wouldn't be as high profile it is as this year, but it sets up who is going to administer the 2024 election here in Georgia. As we all know, it was a very close race here in the presidential election here in Georgia in 2020 and 2021 for the Senate races. And so it's really important to have someone in there in Georgia's minds who represent how they view things going on here. As you mentioned, the current Secretary Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He's running for re-election again. He came into public view in early 2021 when former President Donald Trump pressured him to overturn and get 12,000 more votes for former President Donald Trump over Joe Biden at the time. In that call, Raffensperger stood up to Trump, and that is what we hear from him on the campaign trail here in Georgia as well. He continues to stand by the 2020 election results in Georgia. His challenger, his main challenger, is U.S. Congressman Jody Hice. He's one of about the 140 or so Republicans in the U.S. House who voted against counting the electoral votes on January 6th. He says that Brad Raffensperger doesn't care enough about election integrity. This is all very important as they keep campaigning here over and over again. Jody Hice has the endorsement of Donald Trump, and it looks like it may be a very close race today because as I was talking to voters, a lot of them said they were still undecided, but polls showed today that Jody Hice and Raffensperger are about even for those deciding already who are they going to support.
So, Bo, you talked to voters last night about the power of former President Trump's endorsement. I want to play a few of those interviews.
The fact that President Trump endorses a candidate does not sway me one way or the other. I basically base my opinions on how I feel about the candidate.
I know that Trump is endorsing Perdue, and I will vote for Trump, but I just don't think Perdue is supporting our farmers like he needs to.
I would love for Trump to have a total coalition of people that back him, but sometimes I think that maybe he doesn't know all the ins and outs of the various people and the history of those people.
I think that last comment is probably kind of the most telling and most reflective. Often we frame these questions sort of by asking about Trump's influence over the party. But even the candidates that he doesn't back in many of these races are pretty Trumpy or at least very conservative. And Governor Brian Kemp is a perfect example of that.
Exactly. And that last voter that you heard from, her name was Catherine Harrison. She's an elementary school teacher, a retired elementary school teacher down here in Athens, Georgia. And she loves Trump. She even had a bedazzled purse last night that said Trump on it. But his endorsement is not swaying her opinion in some of the races. For example, she is going to vote for Brian Kemp, the current governor, against the Trump-backed candidate, former U.S. Senator David Perdue. And she is going with Kemp because she thinks he is the more conservative in the race. She specifically pointed to current Governor Kemp signing in the fetal heartbeat bill in 2019, which would have limited abortions after 6 weeks. That law is currently blocked by the courts, but voters like Catherine are still giving Brian Kemp credit for passing these really conservative laws here in Georgia. We will see if he actually beats former U.S. Senator David Perdue tonight. The polls show him in a double-digit lead so far.
Well, Bo, former NFL player Herschel Walker is the Republican frontrunner in the race for Senate. He's also got a lot of name recognition in Georgia, was a standout at the University of Georgia back in the 1980s. He is expected to face Senator Raphael Warnock in November. Now, they are both black, but they have very different ideas on race. Let's play a quick clip from Walker's rally that you covered last night.
Then I started looking at what they were doing to this country, trying to get your kids to hate themselves because of the color of their skin. You know, you can't do it. Telling kids because you're black, somebody taking advantage of you. Where are these people from? It's time for us to elect people to office that's going to do the right thing for this country. Quit doing it for themselves. They're going to ask me why I'm running, because I'm sick and tired of this.
But how has race become a factor in this primary? And is this Senate seat expected to remain blue, or is it anyone's race right now?
Well, you said it, Mola. Herschel Walker has huge name idea, especially as I stand here in Athens, Georgia, which is just right down the street from the University of Georgia, where Herschel Walker was a 3-time All-American football player. The whole crowd last night was wearing UGA football gear, and they were really excited to be there, just in the same room as Herschel Walker. on the campaign as he runs for his first elected office as U.S. Senator. He is mixing his biography, his kind of rise throughout football and into the business community, and says that he did that despite what some politicians are saying now about how race may set some children back. He brings up race a lot in his stump speech. He talks about how elected officials, especially Democrats in Washington, say they talk about race to try to get people to be too emotional and to be too upset to go and vote for Republicans. But he says no, he thinks that the U.S. is one of the only countries in the world where someone like him, despite his race, can rise up to be kind of this huge celebrity and businessman as well. Yesterday at his rally, he said that he is looking already to the November election to take on U.S. Senator Raphael Warnock. That will be two black men competing against each other for the election seat. And polls are already showing in the November election that it could be a tight race. Raphael Warnock has about a 5-point lead, but many voters are still undecided, and that name ID of Herschel Walker is sure to help him as well.
All right, Bo Erickson following some of the most interesting and telling races in the country. Thanks, Bo.